Blog Talk Radio.
I am your co-host. Our topic tonight is addiction. As many have experienced, addiction is guilty of affecting everyone in the family and all reaches beyond school, friends, and virtually everyone the person struggling with the disease of addiction comes in contact with. Now, one of the most significant health-related problems in the United States is drug and alcohol addiction, and addiction is not just limited to substances. Impulse control disorders, which can be considered addiction. There are also behavioral addictions, including
Dr. Maiden.
Yes.
Dr. Maiden.
Yes.
You're breaking up really bad. Your mic is breaking up. Can you double check your mic real quick? Sorry for cutting you off.
All right, I am switching mics, Dr. Pitts.
Okay.
All right.
There you go.
Listeners? Okay. So now, what I was saying was there are many behavioral addictions, including food, sex, pornography, and there's definitely a reason why Pornhub is one of the most visited sites in the world. Unfortunately, when it comes to affect the individual, it impacts the entire family. It affects mothers, fathers, couples, friends, coworkers, and doesn't give a damn about your socioeconomic status, your ethnicity, or any other factor. It impacts all of us in one way or another. Now, tonight, Dr. Pitts and I are proud to welcome our special guest, certified alcohol and drug counselor, Alex Cropper. Alex is a graduate of Goodell State University, and he's also the executive director of North Node Group Counseling, LLC. Welcome to House Talk, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks for welcoming.
Absolutely. Having you and hearing your experience. We're going to have what will undoubtedly be a hard but much needed discussion. This topic is, I know, is very up close, very personal, and speak for you, Dr. It's painful for you as well. But she remains committed to having those hard conversations. That is how House Talk is all about. Because the platform allows conversations, it's a platform that opens the door and enables come together to discussions, share solutions in our relationships, our families, and our communities. On House Talk, we don't want to change, but together we'll be the change we wish to see in others. For those who dare to tune in, engage in discussion, and more importantly, act, House Talk will deliberately and intentionally help you transform your life. As a nation, we're experiencing an addiction crisis, and we know it's very likely each of you, our listeners, may be impacted by addiction or know someone who is or may be suffering from the disease of addiction. On House Talk, we're dedicated to providing solutions for you, and we want to hear from you directly. Call us live during the show to ask any question or share a comment at 515-605-9744. Again, that number is 515-605-9744. We understand the wait times may be long, especially with this topic, but we ask your patience when calling the show. Now, for a much quicker response, you can also chat in real time with Dr. Pitts utilizing the chat window on your screen. Dr. Pitts, I'm going to turn the mic over to you so you can share what's on your heart.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Dr. Maiden. Thank you, Alex, for joining us tonight. And good evening, everyone. As Dr. Maiden said, this episode is one that is very sensitive and difficult for me. I've grappled and at times travailed in preparation for tonight's show, I finally decided that it's time to get closure, to achieve true and complete healing, and to officially close a devastating chapter of my life. Clinically, we have a saying when treating those suffering from the disease of addiction. We say secrets keep you sick. For the addict, that basically means that a secret kept in the dark grows and becomes more harmful and self-loathing while keeping them sick and trapped in addiction. For the person or persons who are connected to the addict, that means we also have secrets grounding in the shame, embarrassment, humiliation, guilt, and sometimes fear that accompanies being the spouse of an addict or being intimately connected to them as their child, sibling, parents, or whatever that other relationship dynamic may be. Listeners, addiction is a family disease. And for me, addiction was something I'd been exposed to most of my childhood, as I had several family members who were drug addicts and alcoholics. But I have to tell you, the relationship that had the greatest impact on me was my marriage to an addict. He was the only man I've ever been married to, and we were the black version of Forrest and Jenny. That's my Forrest Gump reference. Except he was the one suffering from drug and alcohol addiction. In contrast, he was my drug of choice. And for many years, I loved him more than I ever loved myself. I remember in our youth, his mother saying to us that the connection between us was sick. And my mom used to ask what the hold was he had on me. I hear background noise. Can everybody mute their mics, please? The warning signs were there before we were married, but I ignored all the signs, including everyone, his mother and baby sister included, telling me not to marry him. I was going to be his hero. I was going to be his saving grace. I was going to be the one he loved enough to get sober and stay sober. But instead, listeners, what I became was his enabler. I became codependent. I became consumed, trying to be the reason he stopped using. You see, clean and sober, he was the most loving, kind, gentle, charismatic, gifted, and humble man you'd ever meet. However, when that urge would hit him to get high, he would hit. And he would hit me. That first hit came on our honeymoon, and the cycle of violence began in our lives. Did you know that in the U.S. there's a startling connection between substance abuse and domestic violence? And I can tell you that we had more than our fair share of physical altercations. The addiction was also accompanied by infidelity. He once told me the drugs were the other woman, but with the drugs came other women. There was also theft, deception, short and long-term disappearances on binges, financial hardship, loss of housing, and vehicles. Too many health crises, with me being hospitalized way too many times. Major credit damage, and the list goes on and on and on. As the spouse of an addict, I was forced to shoulder an unfair share of the household responsibilities. And additionally, our home was so volatile, so toxic and violent, that it almost cost me custody of my son. For all the obvious reasons, and for some I'll never disclose. I was afraid to stay, and I was afraid to go. Every time I'd get the strength to leave, it wasn't long before the honeymoon phase in our cycle of violence would happen. And I'd come back and I'd take him back. I always came back and I always took him back. He never stopped telling me how much he loved me and wanted us to work things out. And he really, truly was my heavily intoxicating drug of choice. I was also his enabler, as I said earlier, but I was also the scapegoat for all of those who thought it was easier to blame me for his addiction rather than acknowledge that he was a victim of adverse childhood experiences and a wealth of other traumatic experiences that contributed to the extreme maladaptive behaviors for the remainder of his life, as well as the domino effect and endless burned bridges that came as a result of his addiction. Friday, June the 12th, marked the 2-year anniversary of his death as a result of complications from a drug and alcohol overdose. His death was a devastating loss that opened the floodgates of anger, guilt, shame, failure, and a wealth of other emotions that came compounded by how horribly things were handled while he lay in the hospital in a coma and upon his death. He died a senseless and tragic death directly attributed to complications brought on by lethal consumption of drugs and alcohol. Yet there were a select few in his life who continued to make me the scapegoat, and in my opinion, failed to properly honor him for the man he was when drugs and alcohol didn't have him outside his right mind. The ugly, hateful, and loveless manner in which things were handled were so contrary to everything he stood for when his head was on straight. Why, you may ask, am I opening the show with this testimonial? Because the Bible tells us that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And it's time for me to overcome this pain that has punctured my soul, because secrets keep us sick. Because this is not just Lauren's story. This is the story of countless individuals who loved or love an addict more than they love themselves. This is the story of thousands, if not millions, of individuals all around the world who know the gut-wrenching devastation that accompanies loving an addict. Tonight, I release the guilt, the shame, the embarrassment, the humiliation, the anger, the rage, the heartbreak, the pain, the grief, and the loss associated with loving, marrying, trying to save, leaving, returning, leaving again, returning again and again, and finally choosing to be codependent no more, and tragically losing him to the disease of addiction. Tonight, I publicly forgive those who behaved in such a vile and hateful manner at the hospital. I forgive those who took deliberate and disgusting shots at me from the pulpit. I forgive those who continue to behave as if I am somehow responsible for the events that occurred that fateful night. Tonight, I forgive myself for the mistakes I made in our marriage and as his lifelong friend. I find solace tonight in knowing that despite the lies others tell and live, I am the only one he ever gave his last name to. I am the only wife he ever had. Had he ever truly wanted to marry another, he would have, but he didn't. So tonight marks the last page in that chapter of my life. We loved each other as much as we could at that place and space in our lives, but it simply wasn't enough to save him. Tonight, I overcome. Tonight, I say rest in peace, and finally, so shall I. Lastly, I want each of you, our listeners, to overcome too. I want each of you to let the hurt, pain, bitterness, devastation, and unforgiveness go. When we don't let it go, it keeps us bound. And in essence, it's like being crushed over and over again. Just because we love them doesn't mean they should have that power over us. Forgive them and forgive yourself. I want each of you, we want each of you to decide tonight to get clean and sober if you're the addict, and if you're the family member who loves the addict. We want you to decide tonight to be co-dependent no more.
And Dr. Pitts, I think that, when we talk about family members being codependent no more, number one, thank you for that testimony. That was powerful, as you often do. That's very powerful. So to cope with a family member's addiction, it is crucial, it's essential to educate yourself. And we tend to be more prepared to deal with situations when we know what steps to take and what we're up against. And that's the challenge right there. There's more to addiction than what one might see, and to learn about the causes, the symptoms, and more education will make you better prepared to deal with this challenging life problem that your loved ones are going through, but also that you're going through as well, as your testimony just illustrated. It's not just the person with that disease who's going through it. It's everybody it impacts. So, Alex, I'm going to pull you in. So can you talk to us about the difference between drug and alcohol use and abuse versus addiction?
Okay, yes, I can. But before I do, I want to answer. I also want to commend Dr. Pitts for her testimony. I mean, I hear those testimonies time and time again, and this disease, it's it has a very detrimental effect on people in different way, and your strength for sharing your story, if it can be a help for someone else, I commend you for your testimony. Mm-hmm. As far as the question, the difference between abuse and addiction, for some, they may seem like they're one and the same, but they are two different concepts. I mean, individuals who use drugs, they may never become addicted. Some abuse, by definition, relates more to how individuals use drugs or alcohol. They use them inappropriately in an abusive manner, but the effects of such use may never have a significant impact on their lives or any other part of their lives. There are things, there are a lot of people out here that can use drugs and become what you call functioning addicts, that you never see the detrimental effect that it has on their lives. And, when it comes to addiction, you see more of the negative effects of their life, whether it's physical, whether it's psychological, and what continued substance use brings. Some individuals, it takes for them to what's the term, rock bottom, losing it all, family members, losing jobs, materialistic things that they feel though that they cannot come back. It's in the same, it's a different concept. For some, they can use, but either way, both have a lasting effect and how it affects the brain, and what, basically, how it can, the person that's addicted, what we see is, like you said, the legal trouble. You see losing kids, like losing it all. As far as someone that's used, you wonder how it starts. It starts from use. Use leads to addiction.
Now, Alex, let me ask you a question. You touched on something about hitting rock bottom. So, and I'd imagine that looks different for different people. But does it take for the person dealing with that disease of addiction to hit rock bottom for them to start getting help or to recognize that they need help?
Not at all. Sometimes some people just get tired. They get tired of being in the circumstances and the situations that they're in. And so they tend to seek help. They start to lose sight of the person that they once were. And if they see, if you give someone a inkling of hope, and they can see that hope, and that they can, manifest the life that they want to live for themselves, and they hit treatment. The 12 steps realms of way, the traditional way that someone has to hit rock bottom in order for them to change. That's not always the case. I've seen people that just they just got tired. They got tired of what the drugs was doing to them. They got tired of spending the money and just losing things. And so it's not that it's like rock bottom, like you can't go nowhere but up. It's just that if they get tired and they want to change and something inspired them, that's one of the biggest things too. All it takes is something to inspire them, or they see someone else that's doing well, and they say to themselves, I want that. So if I want that, if treatment is the realm for me to get that, then I'm going to walk through these doors to get treatment. So the average person, you always see the stereotype is, oh, they have been in and out of jail, they lost home, they're homeless, their family that gave up on them, and everything like that. And so that individual, they have burned so many bridges. So I have to walk through those doors to change in order for people to accept it.
I also wanted to add to Dr. Maiden and Alex that I think that, or at least what I've seen in my work and previously before I started serving in the capacity that I am now, I actually used to work at an inpatient drug and alcohol facility. And what I learned is that rock bottom is open to interpretation based on the addict. For one person, rock bottom might be the embarrassment, shame, and humiliation of the family members doing an intervention and saying, you're taking your butt to rehab, or ... For another person, it may literally be losing everything, the family, the job, the material things, the whole 9 yards. For someone else, the rock bottom may be someone that's close to them dying from the disease of addiction, whether it be an overdose or complications from long-term use or whatever the case may be, that is the wake-up call they need, and that's how they interpret their rock bottom. So, we definitely, we want listeners to know that your rock bottom is your rock bottom, and you're going to be the one that's going to define that. And what my encouragement to each of our listeners would be, particularly those that may be in active addiction, is that, give some thought to what it would look like and feel like and be like if your rock bottom was that extreme, everything and everybody that ever mattered to you being gone, because it does happen. The other thing too that I realized in my work is that addiction is a selfish disease. It does such a number on the person suffering from addiction that they become self-absorbed. It's all about them. It's all about what they need to quench the thirst or the urge for whatever their drug or substance of choice is. So even in that, the rock bottom might be whoever the family member was that enabled them dies. Stress will kill you. Because stress will show enough kill you. As I said, opening up, just too many hospitalizations. And there were times that I was in the hospital just because of the freaking stress that was associated with being an addict. High blood pressure and anxiety attacks and just all types of stuff that impacts how a person may define what their rock bottom is. So I just wanted to put that out there for our listeners.
Well, you actually triggered another question for me, and it's based on a conversation I had with somebody else. And we talked about maybe a family member doing intervention or something like that. Is that actually effective to get that person dealing with the disease of addiction to get help? Have either of you seen that to be a successful gateway to an individual getting help? Because I know there are a lot of family members out there who are saying, well, it has to be on them to do it.
I've seen it work, and I've seen it not work.
Right, I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, it just all depends on the individual. Yeah, it really all depends on the individual. What's so interesting is that, there were interventions that we did. There were interventions that I did as his wife. There were, interventions that we sort of collaboratively did with some close friends and a couple of family members from time to time. And it worked to get him into treatment, but it didn't last. I will tell you, and don't fall on the floor when I say this, but when I stopped counting, he had been to 42 rehabilitation programs. He had been throughout the course, and that's before our marriage, while we were married, and even after we separated.
What time period? What, 10 years, 5 years? What?
He started using his senior year in college after a traumatic experience that he went through. He started using and didn't stop. Like I said, there were short windows of time that he was clean and sober, but for the years that we were together, the longest that he was ever clean and sober in the 9 years that we were together was 8 months. 8 months. And that's so, when you piece, if I were to extend grace and say 8 months for each of the 8 months for each of the 9 years. Math is not my thing, and my head hurts right now, so I can't do that math. But you get the picture. It was a lot of time that he wasn't sober, and it impacts everything. We had children. We didn't have any children together. He came into our marriage with a child. I came into our marriage with a child. Both of them were boys. So, an extreme amount of diligence had to be done to try to make sure that they weren't scarred for life, growing up and being subjected to all of that stuff. And then I will say, and I count it a blessing from God, that both of the now men are doing extraordinarily well in their lives. They're both formally educated. Go ahead, Dr. Maiden.
No, I said that's beautiful. Go ahead.
Yeah, they were. I mean, they're both formally educated, advanced degrees. They're, neither one of them have any substance use or abuse issues. One of them has children. He is an amazing, amazing father to his children. He's doing some tremendous work in, wanting to make a difference in his clinical pursuits, and just both of the now men, just really wholeheartedly dedicated to having a tremendous positive impact on people. And I believe that a major part of it is because of some of the things that they were each subjected to, as a result of part of their lived experience being, intimately attached to not just the father, stepfather, but other members of the family. So yeah. So
thank you.
I would.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna also, the question that Brian asked. The thing is, like you said in your opening about, just a little while ago about how addiction is a sense of selfishness. So, with the individual, whether you do intervention or how it can be effective, the bottom line is, because that person is in the addiction, they're the addict. So because it's a selfish disease, until they're ready, no matter what you do, no matter what anyone says, until they are ready, that's when they can, change. It can take for something else, external factors to factor in them making that decision to change, but ultimately, they have to make the decision for themselves. So I've seen intervention work. I've seen it turn someone the opposite way to make them even worse because they feel like everyone is against them.
Yep.
So, I've seen it both ways.
Yeah.
Okay. You're listening to House Talk with Dr. Lauren D. Pitts, and tonight we're talking about men and addiction with specific emphasis on substance abuse, underlying reasons for use and abuse, health and relationship issues resulting from addiction, treatment, and so much more. Listeners, we definitely want you to join this conversation. We know it impacts you, your family members, so call in and share your comments or ask a question at 515-605-9744. Again, that number is 515-605-9744.
So, guys, this interesting journey that we have as clinicians and having to provide services for addicts, what I've also learned is that addiction really can happen at any age. When I was working inpatient drug and alcohol, my youngest patient was 7 years old when he started shooting up with his father. And what we find is that addiction usually starts when a person is young. So, if someone continues to use drugs despite the harmful consequences, the person could become addicted. We know that as clinicians, and I'm sure our listeners have figured that out by now. And it's really because one's health and future, it can be at stake when we're talking about addiction. So it's really important for us to have these important discussions. It's really important for the person that may be, on that fence between abuse and addiction to talk to a professional about it. So bearing this in mind, let's discuss for a few minutes how quickly can someone become addicted to a drug, and then why do some people become addicted while others don't? And Alex, you actually touched on that a teeny bit when we first opened. So how quickly can somebody become addicted, and why do some people become addicted and others don't? Whichever one of you want to go first, and then I'll chime in.
Alex, I'll let you take that. You're definitely the expert on that one.
Really, there's no single factor that can predict whether or not a person will become addicted to drugs when they're used. There's always a risk, that individual take courses of choice. But if you had to look at some of the factors that could play into it, you have the biology, the genetic makeup of a person, their influence, their environmental influences. They grew up into a drug infested area or a household full of addicts, and basically they're from the time that they were be able to walk and everything like that. I always hear stories of everyone in the family, they drank, they used drugs, and so they become what you call a product of their own environment.
Right.
So also still, it always stems from the use. That not one person become an addict overnight. It always starts with use, and that use turns into a habit. The habit turns into the habit turns into addiction. So when it comes to the difference, like the question you asked before, the difference of use and addiction is once it becomes a habitual, and then they start using because of external factors. They're using because external factors of whatever's going on in their life, and if they want to numb the pain from the world that they see versus what anyone else sees. So those factors that can determine how and it's different from different people. Some people can start using and just like that, they off to the races. Some it can be a slow, gradual process, but at the end of the day, with continued use and everything, if they're using it to block things out, and it can turn into addiction, and then you have to factor in the mental, the psychological, the developmental, like you just said, the earliest person that you found addicted to drugs was 7 years old. So you imagine the mental capacity of that 7-year-old, and if you hear in some of the rooms when they're talking about addiction, you say that the age that you start using is the age that kind of like stunts your growth. So if you turn into an addict, by the time you start to get clean, basically if he started at 7, he has the mental capacity of, a young child.
Yep.
Even as he grows older, even as he grows into his teens and adulthood, you're saying he maintains that 7-year-old mentality?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, you still, regardless, you grow in age with anyone, but the mental capacity of some of the people that you encounter time and time again is like, man, he's a grown adult, but he acts like a child.
Yep. They sure enough do.
Yeah.
And to piggyback on that, when we talk about why some people become addicted and some people don't, listeners, we need you to be aware that some of you are predisposed to the likelihood that you're going to become addicts because of, as Alex said, you grew up in a home full of drinkers and druggers. Some of you were born on drugs, with drugs in your system because the mother was addicted to drugs when she gave birth. So all of those things come into play and can really increase the likelihood that you could become an addict. Hence why it's so important you know, we know that we live in a society where recreational drug use is a big deal. And Dr. Maiden is going to touch on that as soon as we finish up these next couple seconds on this question. You know, we talk about recreational drug use, but there's definitely some drugs out there that have a greater ability to cause addiction than others. And for some, the addiction is relatively quick. So when you think, for example, about the crack cocaine epidemic when it hit, you know, back in the 80s, there were some folks that were getting, like, they were hooked the first time. So it really too depends on the specific drug, right? So all of these things, listeners, what we're saying to you is we want you to take each of these things into consideration. And I'm going to go to the phone lines, gentlemen, because we do have a caller. Caller 2974, you're on the air. Welcome to House Talk. What is your comment or question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'd like to know, just based on your expertise, what do you feel is the difference between the heroin epidemic that we're encountering present day versus the crack epidemic in the 80s? What is the driving force behind that? Why all of a sudden are there so many programs alluding to this heroin epidemic versus the incarceration that took place in the 80s for those users? I was just wondering if you could enlighten on that just a little bit.
That's you know, thank you for your question. You know, that's in the minds of a lot of people, and it's something that should be widely discussed. The difference is that where the crack cocaine epidemic hit first, it was largely affected into the you know, African American community. So the difference is with this heroin, you know, it don't discriminate. You know, with the heroin epidemic, so you have more of the you know, whites and things that more affected, where it's affecting their, you know, people that's prominent in society. So it's not discriminating across the board. So where in the 80s, we saw a lot of our brothers and sisters being locked up instead of being, you know, accessible to treatment. But now you see more treatment popping up all over the place for this heroin epidemic, which, you know, in my opinion, which is just my opinion, and I'm happy to share it, this heroin was on the scene before and it came back. Why did it come back? You know, when the boom of the pain pills hit the scene, that's what got a lot of people addicted.
Yeah.
Pharmaceutical companies getting involved, and they're pushing the, you know, the pain pills. People that were poor, Medicaid, you know, they was wildly effective because at one point it was easy accessible. If you needed pain pills, so it's easy accessible. But then when they took that away, what did people start going to? The cheaper version of the Percocet or the Oxycontin, because what is that? Synthetic heroin.
I think it might have something to do, or at least what I've been hearing, you know, in the chatter around the country about it. I think too that cost is playing a part. I know that was one of the things that we talked about a lot when I was working inpatient drug and alcohol, is that heroin is cheap, or at least it was at one point, right? So, you know, it's a cheap high, but it's a very, very addictive high. So, you know, certainly, you know, everything in this society comes down to dollars and cents. I really think that a major contributing factor may be the difference in cost between crack and heroin as well.
And in addition to that, and I think the caller was alluding to this, I don't want to speak for the caller, but I think the caller was alluding to this in the fact that, you know, and Alex, you touched on this, the racial disparity. So where the crack epidemic hit, and it was largely African American, and we were getting locked up. And
Yep.
it was about that same time that they were privatizing prisons, so they had to fill those prisons. And so, in doing my research, I saw that that was a major factor in that. So they weren't keen on curing that for a number of reasons, including the fact that they were making money off of it, but it was also within the black community. So, you know, I'm hearing people, you talk about rumblings, I'm hearing people saying that because it's heroin and because it's affecting a more diverse population, that now there are treatment centers and that's the focus now, as opposed to issuing prison sentences, it's treatment instead, which is a good thing for me. As a healer, it's a good thing for me. I want everybody to get treatment. But I think that was one of the bigger disparities that we were dealing with between crack cocaine and the heroin epidemic.
Yeah.
Right.
Caller, we hope that answers your question.
It
Nice.
did, and I thank you guys very much.
Thank you. Gentlemen,
So
we have
one-
another call. We have another caller. You want me? Yeah. Caller 7988, you're on the air. Welcome to House Talk. What is your comment or question? Caller 7988, welcome to House Talk. What is your comment or question?
I just enjoyed the show. It was very insightful. I think we all can relate to the doctor's story. We're also familiar with it, and I'm just glad that we're talking about it more so now, especially in the African American community, rather than hiding behind our truth.
True.
Thank you.
True. Good comment.
Okay, Dr. Maiden, back to you, sir.
Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to talk about was marijuana. Because marijuana is so popular right now and it's being legalized in many states, the myth is that you can't get addicted to weed. So, Alex and Dr. Pitts, can you two speak to that? Is marijuana addictive?
I would say, it's a substance. So, with substances go, it go hand in hand. Anything that you use, or anything, you become dependent on, it's going to affect you in ways of psychological and physical. You can feel, physical withdrawals from marijuana in terms of anxious, irritability. Some people say that it's like they're coughing in the morning. If they don't have it, you don't want to see them the rest of the day. So where it doesn't have the real physical withdrawals of other drugs, other harsher drugs, it's still a drug. And the more you use it, the more you become dependent on it, the more it's almost like it's a habit. You do the same thing every day. You used to doing that same thing every day. If you don't do it, it throws everything off. So a lot of people, this is a myth just because it's marijuana that you can't get addicted. You can stop anytime you want.
Absolutely.
That's
it's from
true.
the earth. It's good for you.
Say again?
They say it's from the earth. It's good for you.
That's right. That's right. You hear it all the time. You don't really hear nothing negative. The one thing about marijuana, you don't hear too many people robbing and killing people just because it's affecting their life in many different ways. So you hear people say that's the lesser of the evils when it comes to substances. Yes, and from my view, yes, you can be addicted to marijuana, not to the point where you're addicted like with other drugs. But like I said, it does have that dependence factor that you're doing the same thing every day. You're using the drugs, so that high, sometimes you got to use more of it. If you got to use more of it to get high, then that's going to cause things to change in every other area.
And to piggyback on the the using more of it and the dependence piece, it's like, and we've all heard the same story. Oh, we've heard it both ways, that marijuana is the gateway drug to stronger, substances and all of that. And there's research to support that, because at the end of the day, once tolerance sets in, dependence can form. It's just like Alex and it's a drug. It is an absolute positive drug that is impacting the brain. One of the things that I used to say where my husband was concerned is that he had chemical-induced brain damage. So when you're constantly putting, whether it's from the earth or not, when you're putting a substance in your body that is altering the functioning of your brain over prolonged periods of time, it stands to reason that it is possible that addiction could happen. And when you think about the prolonged use and you're finding that it takes more and more and more to get high, one of the other things that you have to take into consideration is the other parts of your body that may be impacted. One of the things that has just always made me extremely nervous, and I've seen it happen over and over and over again in my family, is individuals who have high blood pressure and diabetes getting high. It's like, are you freaking serious? Like, in what world is that a good idea? You have high blood pressure and you're a diabetic and you're drinking and drugging, and oh, by the way, my husband had high blood pressure and diabetes. So what is liquor full of? Sugar. If you're a diabetic, are you supposed to be having a whole bunch? So there's so many other things that can happen. So those things can happen with marijuana too. It's just like, Allison said, it might not have as harsh an impact as some of the other stronger drugs do, but at the end of the day, it is impacting one's brain, and it truly can end up being a pathway to abuse and addiction. The other thing that I just want to add before we move on is that if your normal state of existence is high, that's a problem. I don't care whether it's weed or not. If you get up in the morning and you have to have marijuana for breakfast, lunch, dinner, your afternoon snack, your morning snack, and you can't function without being high, you should probably take a look at that. I'm just saying. We have another caller. You want me to bring them in?
Absolutely. Or? Absolutely.
Okay. Caller 2134, you're on the air. Welcome to House Talk. What is your comment or question?
Good evening. Thank you for sharing your story. And I'd like to ask a question about treatment. I know I heard inpatient treatment. Are there any outpatient options out there?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And what I will do when we do what we call a keys for your catering post, because they are lengthy, so I'll put some of the top ones that we have. And what I'll do is, since we're located in the tri-state area of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, I will definitely put some that are in the region in. Mr. Cropper actually provides outpatient services in the southern Delaware area. So certainly his organization is an option, and that information will be posted at the end of the show as well. But there certainly are a number of outpatient options. The other thing that you want to be mindful of is the length of time. You have some outpatient programs that, they may want you to be in treatment for 30 days. Some may want you to be in treatment for 45 days. The amount of time that the service is going to depend upon, the level of addiction that a person may be in. But we will certainly post those resources at the end of the show.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Have a good night. Thank you for calling.
You too. Bye-bye.
You guys there? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So just to piggyback on what you were saying, Dr. Pitt. Yeah, I know people. I have friends who will not leave who will not apply for jobs if there's any drug testing there because they're not giving up. And it's weed. They're not giving up their weed, and they have said that too. I'm not stopping smoking, no matter what this job is, no matter what it pays. I'm not giving it up.
Right, which is crazy.
So yeah,
that's true. That's chemical induced nuts. Like, so you would rather work a menial job, living paycheck to paycheck, barely making it, not having a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, rather than stop smoking weed and get a better paying job based on your overall. That's problematic. For personally and professionally, that's problematic for me, and it just absolutely positively makes no sense. And it suggests to me clinically there's a major problem.
Indeed.
So remember I said earlier that all the warning signs were there before I got married, but I ignored them. And truth be told, the warning signs can vary from person to person. And let me just say, some are better than others at concealing their drug and alcohol use and subsequent abuse. So the warning signs might not initially be as obvious. Understanding this, how will someone know if someone is using or is addicted to drugs? And how can you find help? And before we answer that question, we have another caller. Caller 1457, you're on the air. Welcome to House Talk. What is your comment or question?
Hello, doctors. This is a really good show. It's really interesting. I had a question about how addiction affects family members. So when I first went into therapy, I went to therapy for anger management, and I had this really interesting therapist who claimed that all kinds of things could be addictions, that anger could be an addiction, and that I was addicted to anger. And she also told me that all addictions lead to death if they are not stopped, if you don't get some kind of help. So that's where it's ultimately going to end. So when you see this in a family member, you have perspective. You see someone who is addicted to something and they won't stop, and it just keeps getting more and more and more destructive. That puts the family member in such a painful place of, how long do I go along with this, or should I stop? And what kind of advice do you have to give with regard to that, enabling, basically?
Okay. Can I go first, gentlemen?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
And do you think that the addiction will lead to death if not stopped? Is that true? That, if they don't get the help, it's going to lead to death?
So I will say that I think that that's kind of an extreme statement. When I think about the different things that people are addicted to, because, our focus tonight is on drugs and alcohol, but people have their sex addiction, their shopping addiction, there's, I'm right there with you. I was accused of being addicted to anger and rage and all of that stuff too. So I think that the objective way to look at that piece is to take into consideration what the addiction is, first and foremost. I think that anything in excess is not healthy, but to go to the far left of the spectrum and say that all addiction is going to lead to death, I don't necessarily believe that that's a fair statement, but that's just my opinion. As far as the enabling piece goes, making that decision to stop enabling it's a choice, and it's a very, very hard choice to make. But at the end of the day, your own well-being, your own self-care is going to be contingent upon your ability to do that. Because what ends up happening, as we've said throughout, our discussion tonight, because addiction has such a domino effect and really does adversely impact everything in its path, if it's allowed to do so, those of us that are connected to addicts, that are connected to alcoholics, we have to be deliberate and intentional in letting go. We have to be deliberate and intentional in not trying to control the addict or the alcoholic. Because at the end of the day, as Alex said, it's going to be their choice. We can't make them do anything. And people have free will. We can, beat them over the head and try and get them to stop, and we can guilt trip them and cry and scream and snivel and stuff. We can do all those things that we've done as loved ones of addicts. But at the end of the day, if they want to go out of here because they're addicts, they're going to leave here. They're going to keep doing what they do because they have to want to stop. And if you don't decide to stop enabling, their addiction could kill you. You'll be in an early grave, and they'll still be getting high. Gentlemen, you want to add anything?
Alex?
I think you in a nutshell, you covered everything, from, the many different various topics that we discussed tonight. But just like you said, I mean, depends on, all addiction, no matter which or what it is, it all involves, dangerous, risky behavior. So regardless what it is that you're doing, that dangerous, risky behavior can contribute some use of drugs, the dangerous use of abuse of doing of drugs like alcohol and heroin. Those drugs, you definitely, with heroin, yes, you can overdose. With alcohol, if you're alcoholism, cirrhosis of the liver, delirious tremens where you're hallucinating, it's many different factors. The withdrawal for alcohol alone can physically shut your body down.
Right.
So those drugs, yes, they can lead to death, but death comes in many different forms. Many different contributing factors. I mean, the use of drugs and the abuse that it has on the body, the abuse that it has on your organs, and everything like that, that can contribute to your death. Now, the effect that it has on the family members is the first question you asked. I mean, it always has a detrimental strain. Like Dr. Pitts said, and over about the codependency and the enabling. There's all contributing factors of how long, you want to love you want to love the individual that's addicted. You don't want to turn your back on them. But sometimes you have to say no. You have to give them that tough love and draw the line. Because if you continue to give it to them, all you're doing is aiding and abetting, and you may be contributing to their death.
Yep.
And then the
last Alex. Say it again.
Say that again.
I said, say that part about you enabling can contribute to their death. Say that thing again.
That enabling can contribute to that death, and then the effect that it has on you, because you're remaining, and when the smoke clears and that person is being put in the ground, and now the shame and guilt is still put on that family member. That's enabling, because you're gonna always think, I was the cause of this person's death, his or her death, even though it's their choice to continue, and knowing the risky behavior of continuing, that addictive behavior, that effect, because you feel as though that you don't want to turn your back on this person. You want to do everything that you can to help them out. The way to help them out is drag them to a treatment. Continue to, like I used to tell, clients, I said, and how they deal with certain things. You come home, leave brochures around. Leave handouts that you get from treatment around, and maybe a hopes and they pick it up, and everything, and start to read it so something can click. Sometimes you can't go to direct approach. Sometimes you got to do the indirect approach. So it's many different things that can be done and how you can get someone, to treatment without compromising, yourself and becoming an enabler and, contributing. Me personally, I could not live with myself and just see someone being addicted and continue to basically set them up for their downfall. And that's the reason why I got into this field, to do the things that I do. And I've never been the person to give up on someone. I can help you in many different ways. Like, I'm the type of person that I see a homeless person and I know I can look them in their face and I tell that, okay, you're homeless because of, your use. So you're asking for money, but that money is not going for you to get food. It's for you to get drugs. So my heart is not going to allow me to give them money for drugs, but if you're hungry, I'm going to take you to get you something to eat, or I'm going to bring food back to you. I'm not going to enable you in a way to that I may read about you later that you was found dead somewhere, overdosed, and I was the one that gave you $5, and you in the middle of the street with a sign up.
Yeah.
And so, I want to piggyback on that real quick. Go ahead, Dr. Maiden. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, number one, I applaud you for seeking help, for going to counseling. And I think the biggest thing that Dr. Pitts and Alex just talked about was self-care. During that process, make sure that you are continuing to take care of yourself, that you are still your number one priority.
Okay,
ahead,
thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. The other thing I wanted to piggyback on that before we go back to that question is that you have people out here that not only are they enabling, but they bragging about it. They bragging about going to the crack house to get them out. They bragging about paying their bills for them. They're bragging about, I did this and I did. That mess ain't cute. That mess is not cute, and it's unacceptable. And anybody who's codependent like that, as that caller just said, and certainly we applaud her transparency and her vulnerability for sharing with us that she's seeking counsel to address the fact that she's an enabler. If you're out there and you're the person that's guilty of being an enabler, we want you to get some help and support too. We're going to put information up there because you need to seek help. There is no justification for enabling. There's no justification for bragging about going to get the alcoholic, going to get the drug addict. There's no justification for you buying them drugs or supporting. That's old school, right? We used to say you supporting their habit. You buying them their drink. You buying them their bag. You really, the moment you make the decision to support that habit, it's the same as you putting a loaded gun in that person's hand and pulling the trigger with the gun to their temple. So stop acting as if you've done some great thing because you have gone to the crack houses and to the bars and to wherever else you're going to support this person's habit, because you are guilty of helping that person speed up their death. Now, the question was, how will you know if someone is using or is addicted to drugs, and how can you find help? Alex, you want to go first? Or Dr. Maiden, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
All right. There's many different signs that you can tell, and with each different drug, there's a different effect that it has on, different individuals. But some of them, you see someone with a sense of lethargy, not being themselves, their sleeping problems, changing the eating habits, excessive need for, borrowing money, just
feeling it.
You can see, bloodshot eyes, seeing their, for some it depends on what they're doing. You can see their face start to sunk in, and they losing uncontrollably losing weight. So it's many different signs that you can tell a person is not being themselves. Bad part about it, with some people, you can't see the signs. They can be addicted to something and they show no signs. You just have to be, they're so secretive that they can hide the addiction. But with anything, and the age-old rule, what goes on in the dark always will come to light. So, those are some of the signs that you can tell that, someone's not being, being neglectful, lack of responsibility, no accountability at work, or, paying their bills, or self-care. It's all many different factors you can tell or start to suspect that someone is, using drugs. And that was a question about, how to get them help. One is not to be blind or turn a blind eye to that you can tell that someone is. Once you start seeing those signs and those symptoms, basically like check up on the person. Really have a real conversation with them, and if they can't give you, the average, telltale sign, if you ask the person directly, they don't give you eye contact, you already know that they're lying about what they're doing. So, with those things, as long as if they can acknowledge that they do have a problem or that they are using, and you suspect and you see them, then you talk to them about avenues of treatment. But like I said in the question before, once you see the early signs of how long a person been using, or if they are addicted, again, no matter what you try to do, no matter what you try to lay on that person, if that person is not willing to do it for themselves first, they can try to do it for other people. The pressure can be put on them for them to get treatment. But ultimately, if they're not doing it for themselves, if they're not ready, it's almost like a moot point. But as you love that person, you still, you don't want to give up on them. So you want to continue to kind of encourage, because that's all you can do. You can support and encourage and let them know you be there for them when they're ready to get help. Sometimes you have to take a step back and not kind of try to force it on them, because when you're trying to force something on anyone, they get all defensive and they go the other way. They're not going to come towards you. They're going to go the other way, and they're going to just push you further away. So as long as you're encouraging and just saying, hey, look, the option is there when you're ready. But however, again, like we said before, and if anyone listening, and when you see and you encounter, you cannot become their enabler, regardless whether they're going through, their addiction and everything like that. You can be there to support them. But that don't mean you have to support them monetarily to keep feeding them, their addiction.
That's right. Do you want to add something, Dr. Bailey?
I do. So, and I'm actually going to expand the conversation. So I was a school counselor for 18 years, and I'm going to respond with a question that's been asked me on numerous occasions by parents. So we're taught to look for changes in behavior, and that's what you were talking about, Alex. But it's challenging during adolescence, because adolescence is a time of great change. We're talking hormones, there's increased secrecy, mood swings, behavioral changes. So what do we tell parents who are concerned that their children may be using drugs? Because all those things you just talked about are things that adolescents are automatically going through, or typically going through. So what do we look at?
Hold on.
Well, what you want me to go first, Alex?
Hold on. It was my mic was breaking up. Can you say that again?
Absolutely. So I was saying that, as a former school counselor, I had parents ask me all the time about what they should look for if they were concerned about their son or daughter using drugs. And some of the things you talked about were, the increased secrecy, the mood swings, the behavioral changes, but all that's inherent within adolescence. So that's kind of normal for those teenagers. So what would we say to those parents who are concerned about whether their son or daughter is using drugs? What things should they look for, and what things should they do to help them out?
Can I ask?
I would say they would look for I can't speak for everyone's household, but I can tell you from mine, and being a drug counselor for many years, yes, those are some of the things that teens do, but you also, many parents, they always say, I know my kid, and when your kid is acting abnormal or not the way that they normally act, and you can kind of see some of those same things, but it's affecting other areas. You can kind of suspect, and just being honest, like I said, that being a drug counselor, yes, I can oversee. So when it happened in my household, my wife and I, hey, we gonna drug test you.
Say that.
we gonna drug test you, and the thing about it is they'll lie to your face and say, no, I'm not. But when you see the difference, and you know there is a difference, and everything like that. So okay, if you have nothing to hide, here's this cup. There's nothing wrong with a parent. There's nothing wrong with a parent saying that, you know what, even though I trust you and you're my child, it's nothing wrong with a parent saying, you know what, I just want to make sure. And if you're telling me the truth and you have nothing to hide, here's this cup.
So not grab the strap, grab the cup.
That's right.
That's real. Dr. Maiden, I wanted to add to that too, because I think that, and I've certainly said it, I know my child, right? So I think within the context of knowing our children, I think that we have to look for those extreme shifts in behavior. So for example, if you find that your child is hanging out with a completely different group of friends than what they used to, that's a warning sign. If you have a child, for example, that's typically meticulous about their appearance, and you're finding that they're not caring as much about their appearance as they used to, or if you have a child that's notoriously sloppy, but they're sloppier than they usually are, or if hygiene issues come into play, a drop in grades. If you got a kid that's, he's a CD student and all of a sudden he's failing every darn thing, or if you have an A student who's now a CDF student, that's a major warning sign. Missing classes, cutting school, losing interest in stuff that they may have otherwise found, to be really interesting, or something that you as a parent would label as their favorite activity. Getting in trouble in school or getting in trouble with the police, major warning sign.
And attendance issues are also a big thing for us as well.
Attendance, you said?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think Alex alluded to the eating different and the sleeping habits. That's definitely something to pay attention to. And then here's a big one that I see as a family therapist when you're dealing with adolescents with drug problems. The tension between the teenager and the other family members is on a whole nother level of hostility. They're snappy, they're arguing, fussing, and fighting more. You're finding that they're being more defiant. Perhaps they're being more disrespectful. They're pressing you out to go places perhaps that they wouldn't normally go. Those are some major, major, major warning signs that your adolescent may be doing drugs.
Thank you.
So
yeah.
we're getting tight on time. and I think we've alluded a lot to how addiction adversely affects the addict or the alcoholic's immediate family, extended family, and other relationships, and how those behaviors can manifest themselves. And I really, truth be told, I think that the things that we just shared where adolescence is concerned are the same things that apply for adults. I think that, something, obviously adults might not be in school or whatever the case may be, but from a social recreational standpoint, finances and things like that, I think that we've done a really, really good job of hitting those things and highlighting. So Dr. Maiden, if you want to so we can start talking about the some of the other helps that are out there, and we can transition. We got about 10 minutes.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, listeners, family, friends, if you or someone you know has a problem with drugs and needs help, you can contact the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's Behavioral Health Treatment Services locator at www.samhsa, samhsa.gov, or call 1-800-662-HELP. That's 1-800-662-4357. That spells out help. You can also call the National Drug Helpline at 1-888-633-3239. And additionally, there are some key points that we want to keep in the forefront of your mind for tonight's show. For me, it's that this impacts the entire family, whether it's the person dealing with the disease of addiction or those family members. And what I've learned from tonight is that everyone needs assistance, not just that person who is dealing with the disease of addiction, but also those the family members and friends as well. So those are my key points. So Dr. Pitts, what are one or two key points that you want our listeners to take from tonight's show? Same thing with you, Alex.
A couple of things. I think that it's really important. You actually sort of just said, I'm just going to expound on it a little bit. That assistance that everybody needs is a big deal. What we talked about in the beginning is how there's so much shame and humiliation that comes with the disease of addiction, and people, you got folk out there that, the world thinks that they're, the Huxtables or the Cleavers or the Chrisleys or whoever, right? But behind closed doors, it's a little house of horrors because you have all this stuff going on. And I think that one of the keys that I want to highlight for the listeners is you have to be willing to have the real, vulnerable, and transparent conversations. You have to be willing as a family to get the support and the help that you need for the family. Because one of the things that we didn't touch on is that where the kids are concerned in these homes where parents are drinking and drugging, that falls under the umbrella of an adverse childhood experience. So all of the craziness that goes on when you're living in a home that's laden with drugs and alcohol is going to have a negative effect on the kids. So some of those same behaviors that we talked about that exist when a child is doing drugs, some of those same behaviors can exist when the child is in a home where drugs and alcohol are being abused. So don't be embarrassed or ashamed to get the support and help you need for the family. And we're going to post some of those resources. Also, consider seeking an intervention. Alex touched on that. We talked about how sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but nothing beats a failure but a try, right? If your loved one is in that extreme state and you're in that place and space where you're drawing the line in the sand and saying enough is enough, seek professional help and get that professional to help you as a family to conduct an intervention to get that person in treatment. And then the other thing that we haven't talked about tonight is that when you get your loved one in treatment, you have to be patient with recovery, because relapse, unfortunately, is part of the recovery process. So you have to be patient, love them unconditionally, but don't do that to your own depletion or to the degree of your own demise. I learned the hard way that in sickness and in health, until death do we part doesn't mean you get to kill me because you're an addict. Alex?
Yeah, I would. For me, I would encourage, the family members, to continue educating yourselves, on addiction. I mean, there are support groups out there, Al-Anon, Narc-Anon, that you can go to learn how to be able to support your loved one through the addiction. Part of the problem that a lot of addicts have is that no one understands what they're going through. So, like Dr. Pitt said, that's one of my, things is just, preaching patience. Being there to endure, with the person, as much as you can. Let them know that you're taking the necessary steps to learn how to deal with them, to help them with their addiction. They see you doing, part of, your due diligence. That may encourage them to do that for themselves. So, and another thing I would say is, try to limit being judgmental. Some people are quick to judge. They're quick to put themselves on a pedestal because someone else's shortcomings. And coming from the voice of addict and doing groups for many years, I hear that all the time. That some looking down the nose of someone else and judging them, that discourage them from wanting to get help because they feel like that why try, as everybody around me is only going to judge me for what I'm doing. So if you can limit being judgmental towards a person that's being addicted, and encourage as much as you can. I mean, if if you're a believer, of course, prayer, making sure that that person, you're lifting that person up as much as you can, and just praying that while they're out there, that even though they're in risky behavior, that you're praying for their safety, you're praying through them, trying to help to cover them while they're out there. That's some of the things that I would say, and just as long as you can, like I said, continue to educate so you understand addiction. A lot of people, they don't understand addiction. They just want to tell someone you should just stop. If it was that easy, there would not be no drug treatment, and there would not be people out here. We wouldn't have jobs. That's right. I wouldn't have a job if it was that easy. So those are some of the key things that I just want the listeners to take from that, and just for myself. I appreciate being on the show. I appreciate having a platform. I think this is something that is largely needed. More than none. I think it should happen. Often. So there should be platforms so that people can be educated and people can know where the resources are and everything. Because that's the worst feeling of the addict, is that I'm ready for help, but I don't know where to go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, listeners, we want to thank you for tuning in tonight. And don't forget to join me and Dr. Maiden next week as we continue our Summer 2019 Madness series with What Type of Crazy Are You? Men and Mental Health, Mind, Body, and Spirit Connection. Don't forget, you can email your questions before the show to Dr. Maiden at Dr. Brian Maiden at You can email your questions before the show to Dr. Maiden at drbrianmaiden@drlaurendpitts.com or lauren@drlaurendpitts.com. Alex, man, you're fire. You're fire. You're fire.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank
And if you're in the Delaware area, and if you need help, we at North Node Group Counseling, 302-257-3135.
Say that one more time.
The phone number is 302-257-3135.
Highly recommended.
Your address?
Address is 1609 South State Street, Dover, Delaware, 19901.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir, for joining us tonight and for adding so much insight for our listeners. Dr. Maiden, you know you my man, 100 grand, man.
Always.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you. Thanks for having
your comfort, your encouragement, and your powerful words of wisdom in our preliminary preparation for tonight's show. It was hard for me. It was hard. Thank you for being an outstanding co-host and, more importantly, a true and dear friend. I love you, man.
Always.
Good night,
love
everyone.
You back. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.